Hello, my name's Andrew, and this is my 91 Camaro Z28. And unfortunately it stopped running the other day and had to have it towed home. So upon diagnosing, we found out that it ended up being the fuel injector wire being shorted out. So what happens is, in this type of system, this whole bank of injectors ends up not firing if one of them goes bad. Think of it like Christmas tree lights. So I'm going to show you what happens when you have a no start issue and what's going on. So just bear with me a second. So if you're cranking and not getting anything out of it, it could be that you have a faulty injector. The first thing we need to do in order to get to the injector rail is to remove two screws that will allow us to take the flexible intake runner off to get to the throttle body. The next thing you want to do is remove the throttle position sensor. Set that to the side. The next thing we want to do is remove the throttle body cables. The top one just pushes forward and comes undone. This one's going to need a flathead screwdriver or something to pry the clip away. With the clip off, you can then remove this slider. For the final throttle cable, you're probably going to need a set of grips so you can pull the tab out, feed the cable around the bottom, and then off. Now the throttle body should be able to come off the car. The throttle body is held on by four 10mm bolts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. With the 4 screws removed from the throttle body, you can now move the throttle body away from the intake plenum. Like so. We have not yet disconnected anything on the other side. We're hoping that we won't have to in order to get the rest of the intake manifold off. Next thing you have to do is remove the throttle cables from their retainer clip. What you need to do is squeeze the two ends of the connector together and then push and they come out. Repeat for the second one and repeat for the third one. After removing the throttle body cables, it is not required to remove the clip that holds on all the cables together. What you will need to do is remove the bolts, the Torx head bolts that go to the intake manifold on both sides. This one is not a Torx head, it is a 10mm nut. The Torx bit size for the intake manifold is a T40. On this side, the driver's side, there will be 3 of them. On the passenger side, there will be 4. You'll also need to remove the distributor cover plate. It's held on by 3 T20 screws. The next thing you'll need to do is remove this electrical clip and harness against the intake manifold. As you can see, this bolt is a 10mm bolt, but you can't back it out all the way. You have to turn it while it's still attached to the harness before you can take anything else out. So remove this, but it will take a little while. After removing this, you'll need to disconnect 3 vacuum lines. 1. Second one in goes to the fuel pressure regulator, and the third one goes to this clip. Now there is one more thing that you need to remove. For the brake booster, there's one more vacuum hose all the way in the back. Should be on the driver's side. There we go. Disconnect that, and we should be able to lift it off. Turns out there is one connector underneath. Let me show you that. I want to make sure you don't rip that off while you're going. Looks like we can just pry up and the connector comes right out. Do not lose that. This throttle cable is run on the inside. I want to make sure that I put that back in before I move everything else back into place. Now it's time to remove the injector clips. These should come out pretty easily. You push in the small metal ring at the bottom towards the front. Wiggle a little bit and they should come right out. You'll have to do this for 4 on each side, total of 8. Using to mark the injector harness order, I would advise you to do the same as you take them off, just so you can keep track of them. It'd be better to use a piece of masking tape if possible and write on that, but I didn't have any, so we have to make do. The next thing we want to do is remove some more of these vacuum lines that may be in the way when taking out the fuel rail. We have one here for the fuel pressure regulator. I'm honestly not sure what this one does, but it just went between these two loops. So we'll keep that on, we'll just move it slightly out of the way. There's one more down here underneath the throttle body, but I'm not sure if it's actually required yet. Next, we want to make sure that we evacuate the fuel out of the system so we don't have any fiery explosions or death. Right here is the Schrader valve. You can actually reach this if you're doing any kind of fuel pressure testing. What I did was went down to Advanced Auto and picked up one of these for about 60 bucks. The stock end that comes with it screws right onto the Schrader valve, as you'll see in a minute. And then when you do key on pressure or running pressure, it'll be able to tell you if you have fuel pressure to the rail. Originally this car had too much fuel in it, and now it has too little because of the bad fuel injector over on the number 3 cylinder. With the fuel pressure tester already connected, you can now press the relief button on the side of it and eject it into your fuel tank or wherever you're keeping your fuel in the meantime. We don't want to just dump it on the ground. For removing the intake runners, there's 4 T10 bolts on each side holding them in. One here, one down there, one all the way at the bottom, and then the only way to get to the 4th one is to come in from this side right down here. You have to come in underneath here with the right size extension. It may take some playing around to find the right size, but you can get access to it and break it loose. As far as the passenger side goes, there's one right there, right where that cutout is. There's one more right there. This one is the one you need to obtain from the driver's side. And then one more underneath the throttle body. Down there. You should be able to pry things away to get room for an extension to get to it. But 4 on each side. Hopefully they're not too tight. After removing the driver's side rear runner rear bolt, it turns out that it's slightly longer than the others. Make sure to note that. This one is one that I pulled out from a normal runner. As you can see how much longer it is. Make sure not to mix them up. Note to self, in order to get these intake manifold bolts from the front, yeah, that one way down there, it helps a lot if you have more play from the throttle body You can do this by taking off the coolant line that goes to the bottom of it, right here, which will give you more room to get to the head of that bolt like you need to. Okay, so after some struggling, it turns out that there's not 4 screws in the lower intake plenums on each side. It turns out that there are 6, 2 of which I didn't find till just now. I needed to have a light so that I could see. One there, and one on that side. I imagine the passenger side will be the same way. Once we remove those 2, in total 6 on each side, 12 in total. Now, to reiterate, with all 6 Torx head screws out, you should be able to easily lift the manifold out. It's very difficult to get these out when in place, so make sure that if you do leave them in while pulling it out, you don't drop them anywhere where you won't be able to reach them. You know what? I'm going to grab them now while I can. 1, 2. Also, something we want to check against. Longest bolts yet. How about that? Plastic's probably making it a little difficult to see. But you can see it easily trumps the other ones. So I'm going to rewrite my baggie so that it shows that the 2 longest ones are at the bottom. Once you're able to get the plenums free, or the runners free, you want to make sure, well, one, I wouldn't try mixing up the sides. It's very possible that you can't actually mix up the sides, but just to be sure, you want to make sure to get all these leaves and crap out of here. As you can see, mine hasn't been out for a long time, so I'm going to want to take care of that. What I am going to do for the evening now is plug up the holes so that no critters get in there, because it doesn't look like I'll be finishing this job today. I'm at a dying light right now. So, okay, just want to make sure to vacuum these out before reassembly. Trying to get out the passenger side runners is proving to be quite difficult. That's because the electrical harness that runs along it is right in the way to get to it. I'd really like to not take that out if I don't have to. So my plan is, with the now new amount of room that I have, try and lift off the injector rail by only having this one side off. There's going to be 4 10mm bolts. So the plan is to remove them. So after taking out the 4 bolts for the fuel rail, turns out that it's still not budging too easily. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is take out these 2 Torx, which create this runner between here, and then I'm going to also remove the one in the back here, and then there's one right here. Hopefully that'll give me enough room to pop just this side of the fuel injector rail out. That way it'll give me access to finally get to the number 3 cylinder injector. So after taking out these 2 clips, one and then one on the underside here, I still don't have enough wiggle room to get the rail out. Right now, this one's being my main problem, but I don't have the room to get to it. So my plan is, if I take out this one, which the line's then connected to here, I can take out that one and hopefully pull this whole assembly with this fuel rail up and out. Time will tell. Okay, it's getting dark now, but with a little bit of prying, I was able to get the fuel rail off of just one side. Was able to get that one. Sorry, you keep hearing blow noises past the microphone, but that's because there's ants and mosquitoes and all other sorts of stuff walking on my face. Anyway, you can see here that these clips that hold on the injectors, they need to move in a clockwise turn so that you can unclip them. Even after I got the number 3 cylinder, as you can see it would go in like this, the number 3 cylinder unlocked, it still took a bit of prying to get the injector out. The reason I had to make sure that I got the injectors out completely before ordering new ones was because this engine's modified and I'm not sure how many pound-an-hour injectors it's using. It could be 22, 25, I'm not sure, but the model number off of the injector will be able to tell me. Now that it's basically dark out in Florida at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I will do some researching. I have to plug up all these holes that I've left everywhere because I don't want lizards and other critters to crawl into them over the night. But you can take off just one side of the fuel rail, assuming that it's on the driver's side. But yeah, good news for now. Still have to clean everything out, make sure none of that gook falls inside the intake manifold. So it's now officially 1 week later exactly. Amazon was nice enough to ship me this brand new rebuilt fuel injector. It turns out that I was using 22 pound-an-hour fuel injectors, which is the stock size for the 91 Z28. So what I'm going to do is use my new parts cleaner, which is the kitchen sink, to clean up the old fuel injectors, making sure that I get rid of all the extra debris on there. We want to make sure that we have a nice clean install going back in. Next thing we need to do is remove the retainer clip from the old fuel injector to put onto the new fuel injector. These should come off pretty easily. I'm hoping to do it with one hand. There you go. With the clip reinstalled back onto the new fuel injector, we should be able to press it into the fuel rail. One step before putting everything back together, you want to make sure that you lube up the O-rings for the fuel rail, that way they slide in a little easier. But I also want to lube up the side that's going to be put into the fuel rail. I'm using some GTX 5W30 oil, but it doesn't really matter as long as you have something that can lubricate the edge. So just lightly coat the O-ring. Next we're going to be pressing in the injector into the injector rail. What we want to make sure of is that the clip orientation is in the same spot so that it matches up and we'll be able to lock it in place. That solid thud means it's locked in place now. Well, it's in. What we need to do now, making sure that the O-ring is in the correct orientation. Making sure that the fuel rail is in the correct orientation so that these clips will line up properly. We need to take a flathead screwdriver and lock the retainer clip into place. This could take a little bit of prying. There it goes. We're going to make sure that the clip is fully seated, and now we're locked in place. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and lube up all the other O-rings that are going to be seated into the block itself. So again, using your motor oil, generous coating. You figure these see oil and fuel and everything else, so this doesn't harm them whatsoever. Do not use butter for lubricant, at least not in this aspect. Use it for artery use only. Okay, now that they're all lubed up, we should be able to reinstall it in the car. As you can see, I had to plug up all the holes again to make sure that no lizards or anything crawled in there. We still might come across one. It's a particularly wet and decent morning today in January. So let's get started. You can see all that carbon disgusting buildup. Car's probably going to run pretty terrible because it's going to have all this new dust in it, but you know, we do what we got to do. With your fuel injector receivers now shiny and clean, I want to stress that it's now time for the reassembly process. Now, what I want to show in this part is the struggle that it actually takes to put something like this back in. I know in all the movie magic and film editing I could just cut it out, but I want you to experience what it's going to be like putting this back in. My main points here are going to be this and this from the fuel injector rail. I had to do a little bit of prying to get mine out when it finally came out, and I want to make sure that you understand it would have been much better to take out the whole other side if possible. That way it would have saved me all this hassle I'm about to go through. So here we go. There's going to be a lot of trial and error with this. Yeah, okay. Or it could just pop in like it's supposed to and make me look like an idiot. What I'm talking about here is making sure that these are back to being fully seated. Currently they're not, so I'm going to have to wiggle them a bit and try and get them to be seated properly. So upon closer inspection, it turns out that I wasn't really dead on with lining up where the hole was. So what I'm going to have to do is start a bolt in there and then push on the rail itself to get it to line back up. That should help seat this further in. Then I can put the retaining clips in, and I'll have to do the other with the same side. Do the same with the other side. So it turns out that because these fuel rail lines are so old, after you take them out, they can't be pushed back in under normal strength while this is still in the car. As you can see, the fuel rail now is in place. It's probably 3 hours after the last cut scene. Essentially, I couldn't get the ones in the back here to pop in place because the O-rings are more of like a press fit in there. So my neighbor heard me or saw me or both struggling with trying to put this all back together. And I said, I just don't have the strength to squeeze both fuel reels back together. So luckily enough, he came by and offered me some clamps. So what I did was I put it over the end like this and then just squeezed it together, and eventually it popped in place. So I did the same thing for the front. So now we're back at reassembly. Here we are, I don't know, 4 hours later today. It's running smooth, a little high on the idle, but it's also got the cam in it, so. Let's see how it does when it's revved slightly. Fingers crossed. That's bad. Blew off a coolant line. Okay, so here we are a half hour later. Had to wait for things to cool down. I was right, one of the coolant lines had just popped off. Gonna be difficult to see. And right, that one. Essentially that line popped off. I'm gonna have to get a better hose clamp to hold it on. The one from the manufacturer has just been crushed too many times and it can't hold its weight. So we'll start it up. There she is. Job done. Thanks for watching.